Welcome, everyone. Good morning to those joining us here in New York, and good evening to my friend Rauf, who's joining us from Doha, Qatar. This is our next installment of the Tisch Institute Spring 2021 Chalk Talk series. And each semester, a few of the faculty will sit down and interview and have some talks with folks that are in alignment with what they research and think about every day. And, we're hoping to stimulate some discussion within and among our student body about these topics. And so today, as I mentioned, I have Rauf with me, who's got a really eclectic background, and I'll let him get into more of his background here in a minute. But just as a quick intro, I see some names on here that I do recognize and some that I don't. So my name is Dr. Ted Hayduck. I am an assistant professor here at the Preston Robert Tisch Institute for Global Sport at NYU. And I do a lot of research in the areas of entrepreneurship and innovation, and specifically where those two areas intersect with the sports and entertainment industry. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Rauf and let him kind of give an overview of his research and his career working both in and outside of government for a little while now, right, Rauf?
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Good morning and good evening, everybody. My name is Rauf Mamadov. I'm currently based in Qatar. For those of you who recognize the background, this is Qatar's recent skyline. Of course, Qatar is evolving and developing very rapidly. A bit about myself. I have a mixed background spanning the national, the central, and the local governments, the developmental banking, and a bit of management consultancy. In my current role with Qatar Development Bank, I'm advisor to the CEO, and the occasion that I had the privilege to know that is through my academic work. In addition to my work at Qatar Development Bank and pursuing my doctorate of business administration with the IE Business School, where my research question focuses on the impact of mega sporting events on local entrepreneurship ecosystems. So that was the occasion. I had the privilege to get in touch, to read first Ted's paper and then to connect with him. And here we are now talking to you and to the audience. One thing, just a bit, for those of you who are not familiar with Qatar, next year, Qatar will be hosting the 2022 FIFA World Cup, something that is known as soccer in the US and the football in the rest of the world. And we are particularly proud to have it because it is the first occasion for an Arab and as well as the Middle Eastern nation to host such an event. And I'm sure most of you are or will be definitely familiar because the next is US, jointly with Mexico and Canada, to host the event in 2026.
Wonderful. So thanks. So you have background in banking and finance on the public side, but also on the consulting side. And I think that kind of gives you a really unique perspective when it comes to thinking about how to best or how to optimally finance a mega event for entrepreneurship and innovation. And so that's why, when you reached out to me initially, it was right away just something that, we have very, very clear research interest, but also I think a sense that, we're not just doing research to do research, we're doing it with the intent of having policy outcomes and having these ideas hopefully implemented in the world someday. And so I think that's representative in your the DBA that you're pursuing, right? The DBA being something that has one foot in the research world and then also has a foot in private industry, and it's a great melding of these two worlds, which traditionally, they don't always speak to each other. And so I just want to make a note of that that I think positions you really well as a source of knowledge and expertise on these topics. Now, before we jump into some of the questions that I have lined up for Rauf here, I would like to kind of make a disclaimer and talk about how the topic for today's discussion is, the impact of mega events on entrepreneurship and innovation. in host regions, there is a tendency when people think about mega events to default to an economic argument. There is a default to assess, let's say, economic impact or the longer run economic development outcomes of hosting such an event. That's not really entirely what we're talking about today, because while entrepreneurship and innovation are linked with long run economic developments, entrepreneurship is a much more nebulous, less crystallized outcome, right? And that makes it much more difficult to think about. We have, multiple levels when we're thinking about the individual. We're thinking about ecosystems at a state or a city level. And then we're thinking about, the macro outcomes that are consistent with entrepreneurship and making life better for everybody in the long run. So just a note, I think that's important, right? Because Rauf, as you've seen in the literature, right, there's a little bit of contention between, on one side, the economists who will view events through that economic lens. Does it create jobs? Does it create better wages? Does it create new businesses? Right, but that's not entirely what we're talking about here. So can you go into a little bit more depth as far as your experience studying entrepreneurship and maybe what that looks like in Doha?
Thank you, Ted. Well, as you rightly mentioned, there is just like in any subject and in any field, there are always multiple schools of thought, multiple opinions, and each one of them, of course, deserves a really interesting, deserves a detailed look at. About entrepreneurship here in Qatar, I just would like to, for your audience, maybe just to mention that Qatar is among those resource-dependent economies. The exports and the GDP of Qatar are heavily dependent on hydrocarbons. Just for your information, as of last year, at the end of 2020, the dependence on the hydrocarbon exports was over 80%. So we can. I just would like to give you a bit of also context that in the context of Qatar, the mega sporting events that Qatar has been successfully hosting since 2006, up until of course 2022, and there is another one in 2030. It is part of the diversification agenda. Of course, I'd like to emphasize that entrepreneurship, the growing entrepreneurship in Qatar, is well aligned with Qatar's National Vision 2030, and again comes under the pillar of the private sector development and promoting entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship in the context, generally in the context of Qatar, implies multiple objectives. The first objective is, of course, diversification of economy, the sources of the export. The second objective is promoting the globally competitive entrepreneurship. For those of you who are familiar with Qatar, it is a small nation. Therefore, there is an appreciation that the companies, for them, the only way for them to grow is actually to grow out of the country. So the global competitiveness is therefore a very important element. And of course, the third element, important element, is to position entrepreneurship in private sector as an employment alternative to the traditionally dominant public sector. So those are the three important dimensions of why government had prioritized entrepreneurship in Qatar. For those of you who are familiar, Qatar Development Bank is considered as the private sector development arm of the government. And it is a bank whose mandate and objectives, and in fact, it is written in our vision, it focuses on promotion of the private sector along those three lines that I've mentioned, which is diversification, the global competitiveness, as well as the positioning private sector as the employment alternative to the public sector. A bit of, just linking it also to my, the academic background that we had a conversation with Ted earlier on, there are different schools of thought, of course. The subject of entrepreneurship, although we're discussing it, actually it also has a bit of controversial, of course, background. There are some, of course, who would club it under the economics, others who would club it under the management, schools. But I believe that entrepreneurship deserves its own standing given its uniqueness. And they mentioned the more you study entrepreneurship, the more you appreciate the uniqueness of entrepreneurship, depending on different contexts, different ecosystems, and not just because of the various different stages of development of various ecosystems, but also entrepreneurship is a very detailed and unique beast that cannot be really tackled with a single, let's say, the theory or with a single approach. So in short, I just would like to summarize my academic experience so far, that entrepreneurship is an evolving field. More and more theories are coming up. Having said that, as I was personally also inspired with the TED's paper, where you've mentioned there are humongous areas for future research. So those of you who are interested in this field and who would like to really have a more dedicated career in this field, there is a lot to learn and there is a lot to dig about in the field of entrepreneurship. So there is I'm sure that the field itself, as it matures, it will offer a lot more avenues for the research.
Yeah, wonderful. One thing you mentioned, I think that's important. A lot of folks are familiar with the upcoming World Cup in Qatar, but you mentioned that there's really a solid slate of events going back to the middle 2000s, right? So can you talk a little bit about what events Qatar has hosted and what maybe you learned from each event as it relates to entrepreneurship?
Thanks, Ted. So the modern history of Qatar's love with the mega sporting events, I would say, dates back to 2004. That is when Qatar made its first major investment into this field by establishing something that we call here Aspire Zone. That's the kind of, I could say, a geospatial let's say area that is dedicated to promoting and the promotion and popularization of sport. Of course, I would like to highlight that Qatar was the first country to introduce the national holiday called National Sports Day. So it is the second Tuesday of every February. So as you may appreciate, we recently had one. It's a good occasion, of course, to have another. Wow. Absolutely. So it is the second February of each year that we are celebrating, and it's official holiday, and everyone is encouraged to go out and exercise and really basically dedicate himself or herself or themselves to the entire families to the sport. But the first test of Qatar's capabilities was probably in 2006, and that is when Qatar hosted the Asian Games. Asian Games is the Asian alternative of Pan American Games. The general, the acknowledgement, we can confidently claim that Qatar succeeded. Having said that, there were a lot of learnings that the country derived out of it, and the next biggest test for Qatar was in 2011 when the nation hosted the 2011 Afc Asian Cup. So Afc Asian Cup, it's the Asian alternative of the soccer cup for the Asian countries. But 2011 is very important for various reasons. First and foremost, literally, a month before because it was held in January 2011, and literally a month before that, in December 2010, FIFA announced Qatar as the host of the 2022 FIFA World Cup. So that specific, that short period was very memorable in the history of Qatar and Qatar's aspirations as a major sporting hub. So 2011 was the Afc Asian Cup. That is, and starting from that period, Qatar started making, the major investments into this field. Those of you who are fans of the La Liga in Spain or the European clubs generally, they all recognize Qatar Airways in the chest of the famous players, the football or soccer players. That is when Qatar really started positioning itself in a more ambitious manner. Later during that period, Qatar established this dedicated sports broadcasting channel, beIN. beIN has been, for the last, I believe, several years, has now been the exclusive broadcasting, the broadcasting and media partner of FIFA for the FIFA, both national as well as the international events. Of course, literally a few weeks ago, Qatar hosted the World Cup for the clubs. So the Club World Cup, where the Germany's Bayern Munich was awarded the crown of the best club in the world. And of course, last but not least, now next year, we will be hosting the FIFA World Cup. I would like to highlight that the Asian Games will come back to Qatar. So Qatar has been awarded literally 2 months ago the rights to host again the Asian Games in the year 2030. So, many people, when discussing about Qatar, and of course, I've also mentioned it, that Qatar is a hydrocarbon-dependent economy, but I would like to claim that Qatar will soon be the mega sporting event-dependent economy. With this magnitude of investments, with this magnitude of the scale and the prestige of the events that Qatar managed to host and is planning and aiming to host, I believe that the nation can definitely deserve having that the status of the mega sporting event hub.
Yeah, I think so. Really, a long and I think rich history, or longer and richer than people typically think about. Right? Everybody knows about that World Cup coming up, but this is part of a concerted 50 to 60 year strategy for the nation. And you're right. I think down the road, there's certainly room for a tourism-based model, or at least an economy that instead of being 80% hydrocarbons, perhaps is moving into something that's 15, 20, 25%, call it sports and tourism more broadly, right? Because that's, I think, a lot of the key here, and a lot of the entrepreneurial energy is being devoted towards getting people to visit for, let's say, the games or an event, but providing them opportunities for event adjacent activities, we'll say, related to entertainment and tourism. But then again, sort of soliciting them back, right, again, over time, to try and create a sense of repetition and a sense of continued leveraging of these events. And so I think that's there's certainly plenty we could go down a wormhole in the leveraging literature too, but I'll spare our students from that. So you mentioned a little bit about Qatar Development Bank and your sort of your goals and objectives. What's the market for capital like in Doha or in Qatar right now? If I was an entrepreneur and I had an idea related to sports, or maybe not, maybe it's related to broadcasting, like you brought up, or maybe it's related to design and construction of venues. What is the availability of capital like, and how has that changed?
As I've mentioned earlier, as Qatar Development Bank, our focus is on promotion and development of the private sector. And definitely, we cannot do that alone in isolation. We are working with partners, including the local organizing committee for the 2022 FIFA World Cup. And I'm glad to mention that we've launched jointly back in 2018 Qatar Sports Tech Accelerator that had helped us tap into that and make our own contribution towards promoting the sports-based industries in Qatar. The industry is still nascent, of course, but having that understanding that the 2022 is not definitely not the first and definitely not the last mega sporting events, and I would say that those are really it would be really terrible to miss those opportunities without having building local domestic clusters. So we've launched the Sports Tech Accelerator, and I'm really glad to mention that we are now in the middle of onboarding the wave 4. So the 4th cohort of the accelerators, are being onboarded as we speak. So just give you a bit of a flavor. Although the title says sports tech, having said that, definitely the scope of the accelerator is broader than that. So you brought an example of the broadcasting or the media dimension. Definitely, it is one of the pillars of interest for the Sports Tech Accelerator. And as we are getting closer to the 2022 FIFA World Cup, in fact, I would like to add that dimension, which is event management, fan experience, is actually becoming more prominent and more of a focus for us. For the information of your audience, I'd like to mention that the The Sports Tech Accelerator was launched jointly with the Startup Bootcamp. So that's the global incubation and acceleration, let's say innovation team that they are a network, in fact, doing it around the world. And Qatar is the first in the Middle East to host and to launch the Sports Tech Accelerator dedicated for the sports tech. Again, I'm also proud to mention that some of the graduates of our Sports Tech Accelerator are already landing very nice and prominent the contracts and the visibility in Europe, specifically in the UK. We are also seeing good vibes coming from the 2022 local organizing committee. So most likely, some of those accelerators will be of use and of service for the event here in Qatar. And but again, I would like to highlight that the Sports Tech Accelerator was launched not just for the purposes of promoting and trying to really build the nascent the industry, which is otherwise nascent in Qatar, but also if you remember, I've mentioned to you that Qatar in the long run views mega sporting events and hosting those events as part of its diversification strategy. So idea is that we've learned from the mistakes of 2006 and 2011, so those AFC Asian Cup, Asian Games, when we really failed to capitalize on those opportunities, to leverage on those events and to build or to domesticate those clusters, the sports clusters. So it is actually coming from that pain and from those learnings that we've decided that, okay, so this is, we shouldn't really miss it this time. Especially again that we are expecting not just the Asian Games in 2030, but there will be a range of other games or other mega sporting events that the nation is planning to host. But you also rightly mentioned that probably we should expand, and the Qatar is not just the host of mega sporting events, but mega events in general. So here we are talking also about the cultural events as well as political events that the nation is generally host to. So the Sports Tech Accelerator will not only help us create the cluster of those ancillary businesses and industries that can help us service the mega sporting events, but for that matter, any event, any event that because by not if you look at the broad the span of those events in general, there are a lot of similarities. So the same, let's say, event management or the fan experience type of let's say the startups that we are onboarding right now will definitely be of benefit for those events as well.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and a theme that I'm noticing as you're talking here is the adjacency of sports to other industries, and to that effect, right? That keys me up because I'm thinking about a lot of students who will, I teach an entrepreneurship class here in our school, and frequently talk to a lot of students about startup ideas, and sometimes at the end of semesters we'll pitch ideas around and things like that. And what I also always try to convey, but that you sort of said it for me, which is great. It's always great to to hear for folks to hear things from someone other than me, is that it's what's going to be most beneficial to a successful sports tech accelerator or incubator or sports tech startup is to think of the sport deployment as a use case, right? Not an end game. And so if you're developing a hardware or software component that can make life better or easier or more efficient in, let's say, a stadium environment, there ideally should be some thought given to, okay, how do you now take that and deploy it in a restaurant environment or a hotel environment or indoor outdoor shopping experience, multi-use development. You alluded to a lot of those different things, and so those are, I think, in what I've noticed anyway, seem to be the most successful sports tech, right, startups. And so is that what you're noticing coming out of the accelerator as well?
Absolutely. So you already actually listed some of those the startups, and also as you've mentioned, given the nature of sport that is so cross-cutting, I'd like to tell you that if you recall, we've also discussed earlier that we have also launched the FinTech Accelerator. So guess what? One of the accelerators of the sports tech accelerator was actually then onboarded into the fintech accelerator, because one of the sports tech related ideas and the startups that we've onboarded earlier was focusing on was creating a dedicated crowdfunding platform for sports clubs. And given the fact that this is a kind of amalgamation of both sport as well as the finance, so we really thought that probably we should really help this startup and slightly upskill him and upscale him, so that then he could also compete now in the financial space, and really kind of help, which also helped that particular startup with getting the banking license. So absolutely, probably maybe just to give you a bit of a quick flavor. What we are, as part of the Sports Tech Accelerator package, it's a 12 weeks program that is run twice a year. We are providing, it's a blend of mentoring and coaching, but at the same time there is also the financial aspect. We are agnostic in terms of the origin of the startups. So quite often we are asked whether we are prioritizing the local startups or the local firms, applicants versus global. No, in fact, we are not. In fact, I would like to add that majority, about 80%, usually in every cohort, are actually global firms. That's the number two. And number three, of course, I'd like to mention that there is a blend of both financial and non-financial support. So the non-financial would be your typical, the demo days, the matchmaking, but there's also the financial support to the tune of $150,000, which is a blend of the cash as well as the in-kind investments that we are making. I would like also to highlight that again, as I've mentioned, the whole purpose of launching this accelerator is to domesticate those businesses in Qatar and to grow that cluster, so that position Qatar as a global hub for the sports tech and for the mega event related businesses. So therefore, we are also encouraging businesses and those who are agreeing to set up part of their operations in Doha. We are providing extra incentives. So there is I would really like to encourage everyone to visit the website. It's qatarsportstech.com, and it will be great to see some of the members of your class or the audience who are listening in right now apply to the accelerator. It will really be great to have them on board with us.
Sure. Yeah, I'm always trying to circulate these kind of ideas out there to them to stimulate thought process and just get more practice, I guess, interacting with these different stakeholders. And you mentioned a couple things. You mentioned the interaction between different accelerators, right? You have the sports tech and you have the fintech accelerator that clearly talk to each other very well. You also mentioned non-financial resources sort of acting in parallel with your finance, your capital. Everybody that's, I think, getting involved with entrepreneurship thinks that capital is the end all be all, and it is ultimately, but you still need all these other non-financial resources. And so I think what we've touched on a little bit is this idea of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial ecosystem there in Doha and how you've watched or seen that change in the run up, let's say in the past few years, in the run up to to the World Cup, or maybe it hasn't changed, right? So I'm curious to learn more about that.
Well, it definitely did change indeed. Maybe I'd like to give a bit of background about the philosophy of the entrepreneurship ecosystem that we are using in Qatar Development Bank. So first and foremost, I always say that development banking is about a market niche or the market gap. So we are not in the business. We are not competing with the commercial banks for the margins or for the attractive profits, but we are in the business of a market gap. So and it is in this. So this principle or this philosophy basically drives all the efforts and the development of the products and services that we have been launching for the last several years. Coming to the ecosystem, we believe that healthy ecosystem is based on 4 pillars. It is first and foremost regulations. So the regulations should be pro-business. They should be friendly to the businesses and should be friendly to the entire value chain of the business. So it's not just about helping them, let's say, register and start the business, but all the way until the exit. It is very important to make this process easy. Number two, it is access to finance. Access to finance is definitely an important element and dimension that's been generally, I believe, acknowledged as the very important element, but I'll come to it in a moment. The number three is access to talent. So it is access to talent that made the provision within our approach for the fintech and the sports tech accelerator. That, as I mentioned, we are agnostic. So we are anyone from anywhere, from any corner of the planet is free to apply. In fact, Qatar, liberalized its the immigration policy. So we can see now, mention that over 80 nationalities can visit Qatar without visa. So there is so the access to talent is very much prioritized. And last but not least is what we believe, and this is the kind of the mistake that we've been kind of repeatedly committing so far, is that regardless of the regulations and regardless of the access to finance and access to talent, access to business is the most important probably element. Because the business that borrows from you, that once it gets registered, borrows working capital financing from you, hires talent, opens, fits the office, unless he or she gets access to business, they will not be able to repay the loan, they will not be able to grow, and they'll not be able to sustain their business in the long run, which is very important for us. So the mortality rate among the startups was really high. So within this, based on this philosophy, we really prioritized access to business. But again, keeping in mind that Qatar is a small nation, with 2.9 million total population, both geographically as well as in terms of population, it's a small country. So that's why in terms of access to business, we prioritized so-called born globals. So the born globals are the firms who are able to, who start exporting in the first 3 years of their operations and whose export revenue is at least 25% of the total revenue. So this is what we prioritized. And in the local front, we prioritize the so-called scale-ups, because we've concluded that given the geospatial and the market limitations within Qatar, we are no longer interested in horizontal growth in terms of the number of those businesses, but we are interested in the vertical growth. We would like the micro to become fast, small become medium, and medium become large, and eventually get out of the radar of the development bank, because our focus is only on the SMEs up to medium sized enterprises. So this is the philosophy. And on the finance, I just would like to bring back, because you also asked this question, that we have regularly, so first and foremost, again, just to give a bit of a context, Qatar is the world's richest country in terms of the GDP per capita. So it is very affluent population, and but having said that, definitely in terms of the repeatedly surveys have resulted that the biggest, let's say the most common type of funding for the startups is still so-called the foods, right? Family, friends, and foods. That is still dominated. Having said that, for the last 3 years we've been doing a research on the access to finance, on the state of access to finance, and to our satisfaction, of course, the common conclusion is that the access to finance, structurally speaking, is not a problem. That is to say that if you have a business plan that is bankable, that with a sufficient IRR, and then obviously you also provide, given the, let's say, nature of the project or the startup, if you also have secured certain partnerships, then there is a generally your loan application will not be rejected. Again, probably I can talk a bit more about this. What we as Qatar Development Bank have done in this regard, but generally the access to finance has not been recognized as the biggest issue. So in the context of Qatar, I'd like to bring to your attention that probably it is access to talent and access to business that are more priority for the startups and in fact even larger businesses.
Yeah, really, really wonderful point there about in many places, Qatar and a lot of the more developed entrepreneurial ecosystems, finance, or at least access to it, isn't necessarily the problem. At the end of the day, it really, really boils down to the quality of people and the quality of ideas that get exchanged between entrepreneurs, advisors, academics in some cases. That's the micro foundation on which an entrepreneurial society is built, right? So it all starts with the individual, and their propensity to, perceive an attainable positive outcome for them and the people they care about, to make their life better in some way that's important to them. And so much of the success of these ecosystems is rooted in the people. Just having the capital isn't enough. Just having the non-financial resources, the advising, the networking events, those things aren't enough in isolation. It has to be, a really well thought out network of financial, non-financial, human capital related resources. And so on that note, I kind of want to shift a little bit and talk about more of a people and human resources related subject, which is, the culture for sports and sports tech in Qatar. What are people most excited about these days in this world of sports tech in your part of the world? And I'm thinking more like, do you see a lot of is it like fan experience startups cropping up, or are you seeing more things related to operational efficiency, or is it analytics like on the pitch, decision making? Where do you think most of the activity's been lately?
So I would say that it's fair to say that it's all of the above, but probably there are certain elements that are more of a, let's say, more prominent. So I'd like to probably cite from the McKinsey's research that they conclude that Qatar has among the highest the levels of penetration of social media, in fact, even much higher than the United States. So therefore, recognizing this factor, you then we then appreciate the fact that there is the fan experience should really embed the dimension of the social media. So it is not just, for example, let's say, showing, for example, broadcasting certain events. It's not just providing, let's say, analytics, but also, so it's not just a kind of one way. We also believe that the social media penetration will allow you the two-way kind of communication, so that as the game progresses, you can also capture through the social media, the sentiment analysis. You can also capture certain, let's say, expectations or emotions of let's say, the local, for example, population or the local audience. So this is something that is, again, should be considered in the context of Qatar. That is very important. It's the social media is very much, the penetration rate is very high, but at the same time, there is a greater, let's say, chance for you, let's say, to meet someone through the social media, let's say Snapchat here, rather than in person. So there is that factor also plays a role. But again, of course, as we get closer to the 2022 FIFA World Cup, more of softer aspects are becoming more prominent. Now, of course, COVID brought about a lot of changes. So, for example, we are not just talking about the fan experience, but now the expectation is that there will be a lot less number of visitors, or not just visitors to the country, but also the visitors to the stadium. So the spectators in the stadium. So that will be the expectation is that so there will be certain, let's say, limitations in terms of the number of spectators, live spectators in the stadium. So that also, of course, creates, although it's of course a bottleneck, but that creates another opportunity for the sports tech. How can you emulate a real life type of experience within the fan zones? So now the fan zone experience has suddenly become more prominent and more important than the experience within the stadiums. So again, there is a bouquet of all these opportunities that are coming. Some that are necessity based, such as COVID, and others, of course, are given the progression and the stage of the development. Again, just for you to give you a bit of a flavor, if let's say 2-3 years back, the sports tech, the greater focus was on the hardware, which is the stadiums. How can we really make sure that these are the smart stadiums? How can we really embed certain functionalities within the seats? How can we really, make sure that there is the visibility of the game, the analytics, and that is available. And in fact, even some of those, the 6D type of the functionalities would be allowed and enabled in the stadiums. Now that the stadiums are complete, now we are moving to, purely to the softer aspects, which is again, fan experience. The analytics, as you've also mentioned, is definitely playing a prominent role. But kind of going to the kind of the backstage slightly, and of course COVID. COVID really, we are definitely monitoring what's going on and what will happen with Tokyo Olympics. This will definitely offer a lot of lessons for us. In fact, the major lessons were already learned from the most recently held Club World Cup. So already those, we already practiced those so-called bubbles, so-called, the event bubbles that have really proven really successful. But again, there is a lot to learn. And of course, depending on how the COVID situation will evolve, that will also bring about, again, both bottlenecks, but at the same time, opportunities for the sports techs and the startups.
Wonderful. I'm curious, one of the challenges you mentioned was, was COVID, obviously, and that's an unforeseen challenge. But one of the challenges that was really, I guess, known about from day one and even before was the unique weather conditions in Qatar, being an extremely dry region, as we were talking about before we got started here. Qatar Doha got their first rain, I think, since last April today, which is just wild to think about. But also humid at times, right? And so this like natural weather, little like microclimate creates problems. And I've seen a little bit of innovation on the stadium development side. I'm curious to know if you've been plugged into that world, and if you could talk a little bit about some of the stadium innovations from a design perspective that have been.
Thank you, Ted. In fact, I'm really glad that you've mentioned it, because if you go back to 2010, that's when the final pitch of the Qatar's bid book was made in front of the FIFA officials. So what was the key pitch, or let's say the key unique selling proposition of Qatar? It is carbon neutral event. And when we mention carbon neutral, there are several dimensions to that, of course. And number two, compact event. So usually if you look at the history of the World Cups, the World Cups are held in multiple cities. Multiple cities spanning, in fact, sometimes more than 1,000 kilometers, in fact, multiple thousands of kilometers, several thousand kilometers, such as, let's say, in Brazil or just most recently in Russia. The advantage of Qatar, the distance between the furthermost stadiums will be around just under 60 kilometers. So the compact was the winning proposition. Number three, one of the pledges that Qatar made. In fact, probably that the typical FIFA World Cup is held in the summer. For Qatar, the exception was made, and it will be held in November, in winter, in the northern hemisphere here. So, but then even at the time of the bid book, of course, these questions were asked. But okay, guys, you would like this event is held in the summer. How are you going to it is impossible to host the event in the summer in Qatar. In fact, nobody goes out in the summer. So one of the let's say the pledges that Qatar made was to come up with the technology of the so-called carbon neutral cooling of the stadiums. In fact, I'm a living example. I actually went once to the fan zone during the Russian FIFA World Cup in Russia in 2018. I actually visited the fan zone that was held here in Qatar, and actually you cannot imagine it was actually held in the summer. Imagine it's a summer. It's the open roof, so it's a conventional fan zone. It's not the indoor area, and you feel really cool. The temperature is around 21, 22. So in fact, when some people ask me, that this is so you are going to maintain it. Well, the first good news, the World Cup will be held in winter. Of course, it created a lot of nightmare for the national, the club championships. It also distorted some calendars of multiple events. But this is the first factor that should ideally take care of the weather factor. But at the same time, I would like to highlight that there is a proven technology that allows for the cooling of the stadiums, and at the same time carbon neutral. And sometimes I joke that what is common between the football players, the soccer players, and tomato is that they actually both require the same temperature. So they both require the same temperature to play, and to grow. So I just would like to show that I'm actually a living example. I actually visited one of those facilities, and it's incredible, how you really literally, you feel, going from the horrible, let's say, the 40 plus, sometimes 50 plus in centigrades, the weather, and you're going into the cool, very comfortable environment. So the technology has already been developed, and this is one of those the pledges that the Qatar local organizing committee made, and this is one of those the solutions that are both carbon neutral as well as the creating the cooling environment that's already been developed. It's already been commercialized, in fact.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. I was reading about one of the stadiums that, I forget at the time, it was a proposed idea, and I believe parts of it they wound up getting implemented. But, when you say carbon neutral way of cooling a stadium, right, it's, that's a very highly constrained problem to solve. Because sure, like if you're in Texas, right, where the Dallas Cowboys play, or Houston, where the Texans play football, American football, you can dome off the stadium and air condition the whole thing, but at an immense cost, both financial and environmental, to do that, right? So the challenge for Doha was how to do that in a more extreme environment, right? Hotter, drier, sometimes more humid than Texas, and how to do it in a way that doesn't use just a ton of energy needlessly. And the design for these stadiums was, it was really, really innovative. And I remember reading about, using the natural like wind patterns of the region and, convection to generate, a movement of air, and strategic kind of like fans in certain areas that were, powered through, powered using solar energy and things like that. So it's just the confluence of all these kind of innovative things coming together. And as you said, the end result was, a surprisingly comfortable viewership experience, for someone that's sitting in the middle of, maybe 90 or 100-degree heat, right? Yeah. Okay, so wonderful. So I think we have a really good understanding now of kind of the state of things in Doha. I'm curious to turn a little bit now to some of your research and some of the research that we've worked on together that has been motivating your whole approach to this for the past, it seems like a few years at least. I'm interested to learn about what you've learned about the, prior case studies, right? I'm thinking specifically, Brazil and South Africa. What did you learn after, becoming really intimately familiar with these locations, the positives and negatives of hosting in each one? And actually, let's just start there. We'll start there for now. I'm curious to learn about what you've learned from your research on the case study side of things.
As you said, that there are both pros and cons. There are positive lessons that can and should be, in fact, looked into by the future hosts, but also the negative ones. Well, as researchers, we would like to dig into the negative ones, of course. So, probably, one of the very important, I believe that, let's say consistently, the very important message that is coming out of the various, in fact, case studies of the hosts of the mega sporting events is the importance of very early stage awareness. The very early stage awareness among the multiple level of stakeholders is really important. In fact, it is crucial for the building that kind of coalition of the willingness and the positive spirit and the positive sentiment. And by various stakeholders, I do not just mean entrepreneurs, but I also mean local communities where the stadiums will be either built or renovated, or the events will be held, because their lives will be impacted. We are also, of course, talking about the various the ancillary, let's say, the service providers. Those are the local tourism, accommodation, the drivers, so there is a general, let's say the palette of those, the stakeholders that must definitely be ideally consulted. In fact, ideally, super ideally, at the very early, in fact, bidding stage. So I'd like to claim that, one of the key, let's say, lessons learned from the examples that you've mentioned, as well as several others, is that lack of that awareness or consultation with these important stakeholders at the early stage. In fact, some of them did not until the very end. Number two is the building capacity. So of course, different nations are hosting the events for different purposes. Even those that you've mentioned, they're hosting for economic gains, for the employment. There is also, of course, the dimension of the, as you've mentioned, the tourism, in order to provide for some sort of, let's say, to promote, the local opportunities, local entrepreneurs. but also, another important dimension that these kind of events, they can also help popularize the brands. So because as we know, the cultural, let's say, awareness or cultural, let's say, proximity is very important. So if really, if this kind of upskilling and capacity building is among the local, let's say, concerned, let's say, stakeholders, is initiated at early stage, it can also allow for their successful participation within the supply chain. Number three, I would like to add is definitely transparency about opportunities. So transparency about opportunities, and here I'm not just talking about, let's say, the cases of corruption when those opportunities were floated, but also the cases of when due to lack of transparency, the local, let's say, participants or the local entrepreneurs were not able, for one reason or another, were not able to benefit from those opportunities, from whatever the mega sporting event has offered. But then at the same time, it would be unfair to really push everything to the part of the local governments and local authorities. I believe that international organizations also have a major role to play. One of the common, let's say, the feedbacks or the negative feedbacks, criticism that the FIFA gets is the bylaws of the FIFA who do not permit the local traders within the 5 to 7 kilometer vicinity of the stadiums. So as you may appreciate, this is a major bottleneck, and this definitely creates a major impediment for the local entrepreneurs to be of any participation within the event. And I would like to highlight that the two examples that you've mentioned, Brazil and South Africa, unfortunately, given the general, let's say, state of, let's say, security in those destinations, it was generally perceived unsafe for the visitors to travel longer distances from the epicenter of the events. Now imagine that because basically the whole, the area, within the 5 to 7 kilometer, depending of course on the country and the cities, those were within that, the radius. I think the local entrepreneurs are being banned from trading and performing an activity. So you can effectively say that there is a basically it's an opportunity that has been wasted on the part of the local government. But again, I would like to highlight that this is not for the reasons of the government, but for the reason of the international organizations. So international organizations also have a major role to play. Now, I mean, if you allow me, I'd like to talk about the positive, elements. What are the positive lessons?
Sure. Well, just before you do that, though, I want to kind of make a note here that jumped out at me. You talk about some of the recommendations related to events like radius, with 2 to 5 miles or blocks or however, and you can't have any commercial activity, unsanctioned commercial activity. And so really what that brings us to is an area, a locale, leveraging these events for entrepreneurship, but recognizing that entrepreneurship has many forms. There is it's easy, for example, to bring startups into the ring and to develop sports tech incubators and to show those ideas kind of preference. And that's one whole world of entrepreneurship, but there's a whole other world of necessity entrepreneurship where people are engaging in opportunistic activities, not because they want to or because they think it'll make them more money, but because they have to, right? They physically have to do these things to, make ends meet or, something like, and we see this a lot in places with high unemployment or high underemployment, right? As people, trying to do other activities, right? The side hustle, so to speak, right? That's in one manifestation of entrepreneurship. And so I think that the takeaway from what I'm hearing and from what we've talked about is that, for regions that are looking to really leverage these events for entrepreneurship is, to commit to it over a length of time, right? Because entrepreneurship is a long run strategy. And two, is to show, I guess I'll say, equitable treatment for all types of entrepreneurs, right? Folks that are doing this because, yeah, maybe they have a tech background and they're a whiz and with Python and R and they can build all kinds of cool apps, but also the folks, that are out there trying to hustle to make it happen and being inclusive of all these different types of entrepreneurs. And so as we're coming up now, we have just like a couple minutes left. I think if you could, I just have one, kind of final question for you. I guess I'll say, what are your predictions for the next 10 years in Doha and in Qatar as it relates to sport mega events and entrepreneurship? Do you think this is going to be, something that really continues to grab people's attention, or is it going to kind of, kind of stagnate, or where do you see this heading in the future?
So definitely it's going to, the prominence of Qatar as a sports destination will grow. The investments that Qatar made so far will continue to grow. The industry, the sports industry in Qatar will, given the opportunities and given the lineup of the major events, are also expected to in fact, form, and this is what we as Qatar Development Bank are doing, are expected to form a solid cluster. If you remember that we've discussed earlier, that it's not just Qatar that is, that identified sport as a major investment proposition, but it is entire region. So therefore, we would like to, kind of always claim that the sports industry in Qatar is not just for Qatar, but actually for the region. So we'd like to position it as a cluster for the region. Now, coming back to your question, definitely for the next 10 years, as it's been already acknowledged that Qatar's hydrocarbon reserves are going now, kind of in the diminishing kind of the trajectory. Sports and other non-hydrocarbon industries will have greater prominence. And we believe that given the amount of investments that Qatar has made in the sport and generally event industry, this will definitely be one of the major focus areas. And again, as I've mentioned, I dream of the day when Qatar will be known for the event or the sport type of dependent economy rather than hydrocarbon economy today. So we are definitely bullish, and there are every reasons to believe in that. And as I've mentioned earlier, major investments have been made both domestically and internationally.
Wonderful. Oh, and you know what? Sorry, I don't mean to hold you longer, but I do see we have one question from a student here. And so Thomas is curious to learn about, he says earlier in the talk, you mentioned that, it's pretty easy for like Qatar Airways, for example, to get their, to get product placement on jerseys and things like that, and all areas of kits, right? What advice would you have for, let's say, a startup who's looking to get their name out there and leverage these events in a way that's beneficial to them, even despite being, resource constrained?
So first and foremost, anyone who's interested, A, in Qatar, B, in any events that are being or will be held in Qatar, please do visit Qatar Sports Tech Accelerator. That is, if you're in the field of if your idea or the startup is in the field of the sport or the sports tech, to be precise. In case if you are generally looking to enter into the, to tap into the World Cup related opportunities, there is definitely your go-to place is Qatar Development Bank. We are definitely on the lookout for the both, as I've mentioned, local as well as the global startups that can help contribute to our success story. So in short, I'd like to again invite everyone to visit qatarsportstech.com. That is definitely your go-to place to be known by the local ecosystem, for you to know also the local ecosystem, and discuss the how you can contribute and be part of the upcoming event. So definitely there is a chance, there is opportunity.
Wonderful. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. This has been the next installment of the Preston Robert Tisch Institute for Global Sports Spring 2021 Chalk Talk series. Say that 5 times fast. My guest this week has been Rauf Mammadov from Doha, Qatar. Thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to a continued dialogue about this really important topic area.
Thank you, and good luck, everyone.